Snow fell like slow drifting ash across the Wyoming range on Christmas Eve, and the wind carried a loneliness that could cut through wool and bone. A ranch house stood firm against the white lantern light, glowing warm inside, while a lone rider reined up at the gate, his coat torn by miles and regret. He had not planned to come, not after all these years, yet the news in his pocket burned hotter than whiskey, and when he dismounted, his boots sank deep, like the past, pulling him down. Inside that house lived the woman he once loved, or so he believed, and fate had brought him here at the cruelest hour. Caleb Drifter had been many things in his life: a hired gun, a trail hand, a gambler who lost more than coin. But tonight, he was just a man with shaking hands. The memory of her face rode with him, Clara with her dark eyes and steady smile, the woman who waited by the river while he chased promises that never paid. He had left her with words too proud to keep, and years later he carried news that could not be ignored, news of a past that refused to stay buried. He stared at the ranch house, heart pounding, louder than the winter wind inside the house. Laughter rose and fell like music, a child's laugh, then another. The sound struck Caleb harder than any fist. He had not expected that. The windows showed shadows moving, a man tall and broad, lifting a child high, a woman's silhouette near the hearth. His chest tightened. The news he carried felt heavier now, because joy lived here, real and earned, and he was an outsider at the door. Snow clung to his hat brim as if urging him to turn back. But the past gave no mercy. He remembered the last Christmas he spent with Clara, a borrowed cabin, a thin fire, and dreams that felt big enough to outrun fear. He had sworn he would come back rich or not at all. She had cried softly, believing him anyway. Now the years lay between them like frozen miles. Caleb flexed his fingers, feeling the scar from a knife fight in Dodge, a reminder of the road he chose. Whatever waited inside that house would judge him. Yet the truth demanded to be spoken. The door opened before he knocked, as if the house itself sensed him. The rancher stood there, solid as an oak, eyes sharp but not unkind. His name was Thomas Hale, though Caleb did not know it yet. A man who had built his life fence post by fence post. Behind him warmth spilled out, firelight, the smell of pine and bread, and the sight of Clara stopped Caleb's breath. She looked older, steadier, happiness softening her face. A child clung to her skirt, and another stood near the rancher's knee, silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of fire and the wind outside. Clara's eyes widened, recognition flashing like lightning, then caution followed. Thomas shifted slightly, protective but calm. He had the look of a man who trusted what he had built. Caleb removed his hat, snow falling to the floor. Words tangled in his throat. He had crossed deserts and mountains, but this step felt the longest. Finally he spoke her name, and it sounded like a prayer and a wound combined. Clara did not move closer, yet she did not retreat. The years passed between them in a single glance. Thomas asked who he was, voice steady, and Caleb answered simply, a drifter with news. The word news changed the air. Clara's hand tightened on the child's shoulder. Caleb saw fear flicker there, not for herself, but for the life she now held. He understood then that whatever he said could shatter or spare. The weight of that choice pressed hard. Snow blew in as Thomas stepped aside, offering the warmth without surrender. A rancher who did not fear the truth. Caleb crossed the threshold, boots heavy, heart heavier. The door closed behind him, sealing past and present in one room. Outside Christmas night howled. Inside a reckoning waited. The news of lost love, of choices made, and roads taken, would soon be spoken, and nothing in this house would remain untouched by it. Caleb stood near the door like a man unsure whether he belonged to warmth or cold. The fire painted his worn face in flickering gold. Thomas Hale offered him a chair, but did not turn his back, not out of fear but habit earned from years of guarding family and land. The children stared with open curiosity until Clara gently ushered them toward the table, their small boots thudding softly on the wooden floor. The room smelled of roasted meat and pine boughs, Christmas made solid and real, and Caleb felt the ache of a life that had never settled long enough to grow roots. He cleared his throat and began to speak of the road, of towns that vanished behind him, of a man he met in a desert saloon who carried a name from the past. Clara listened without interrupting, her face pale but steady, while Thomas watched the drifter with eyes that measured truth more than words. The news came slowly, wrapped in memory and dust. Caleb spoke of Clara's father, a man thought dead after a cattle drive gone wrong, a man who had lived these past years under another name south of the border, wounded but alive. He spoke of a grave that was never filled, and of a promise he made to a dying stranger who was not dying after all. Clara's breath caught as she leaned against the table. The world she had mourned shifted beneath her feet. Grief long settled now stirred again. Thomas moved to her side without a word, his hand firm on her back, grounding her. Caleb continued, explaining how the old man had finally passed this fall, leaving behind letters and a small strongbox, asking only that his daughter know the truth, that she know he never stopped loving her. Each word landed heavy, not like an explosion, but like slow snowfall burying what stood beneath. Clara's tears came quiet and controlled, not the sobs of a young woman abandoned, but the steady grief of someone who had built strength around old wounds. She asked careful questions, where he was buried, what his last days were like, whether he spoke her name. Caleb answered each with care, realizing this was the real reason he had come, not to reclaim a love lost, but to finish a duty owed. Thomas listened to, learning a piece of his wife's past that had lived in silence between them. He felt no jealousy, only a solemn respect for the man who brought this truth across so many miles. The children sensed the weight of the moment and stayed close, whispering among themselves like sparrows sensing a storm. Outside, the wind rattled the windows as if the land itself leaned in to hear. When the talking paused, the house seemed to exhale. Clara excused herself briefly, stepping into the small back room where stockings hung and memories waited. Thomas remained with Caleb, pouring him coffee strong enough to stand a spoon. The rancher finally spoke of his own road, how he met Clara when she came west to teach school, how her quiet strength drew him more than beauty ever could. He spoke of the slow courtship, the shared labor, the way love grew, not like fire but like a fence built straight and true. Caleb listened with a mix of pain and respect, seeing clearly now the life Clara chose after he rode away. Thomas did not boast, he simply told the truth of staying, of choosing one place and one woman when the horizon still called, and Caleb understood that this man had earned everything he held. Clara returned carrying a bundle of old letters tied with faded ribbon, letters she never sent and never burned. She placed them on the table between the men, a quiet bridge between past and present. She thanked Caleb for bringing the truth, for honoring her father's last wish. Her voice trembled only once, then steadied. She said the past had shaped her, but did not rule her. The family she built here was real and strong, yet knowing the truth mattered. Caleb nodded, accepting the boundary drawn with kindness. He realized then that his role in her life was complete, not as a lover returned, but as a witness to what had been and what could never be again. The letters stayed unopened, symbols of a chapter already closed. Supper was shared in silence, broken only by small talk for the children's sake. Thomas insisted Caleb eat, a gesture of hospitality that carried no threat. The food warmed his bones and heart alike. He told stories for the children, softened versions of the trail, horses and stars and campfires, leaving out blood and loss. Their laughter eased something tight in the room. Clara watched this with a soft smile, seeing the man Caleb had become and the man he might have been. Thomas watched too, noting the care with which the drifter chose his words. Trust grew, not loud but steady, like snow settling deep. When the meal ended, Thomas offered Caleb the bunkhouse for the night. Christmas was no time to turn a man back into the storm later. As the house slept, Caleb lay awake, listening to the sounds of a settled life. The creak of wood, the distant low of cattle, the faint murmur of Thomas and Clara talking behind a closed door. He did not strain to hear. Some things were not his anymore. He stared at the ceiling, thinking of all the roads that led him here and all those he would still walk. Bringing the news had lifted a burden yet left an ache. He knew morning would come with decisions, with farewells spoken plain and final. Outside the stars burned cold and bright, indifferent to regret, yet witness to endurance. Before sleep took him, Caleb made peace with what he found. Not rejection, but resolution. The love he lost had not been wasted. It had simply grown in a different soil. Christmas night held sorrow and grace in equal measure, and somewhere between the past he carried and the family he found, Caleb understood that some journeys end not with arrival but with acceptance, and that was a kind of home to dawn came slow and pale across the ranch. The sky washed in winter gray and rose, snow creaking under its own weight. As the world woke careful and quiet, Caleb rose before the others, pulling on his coat with the same practiced motion he had used for years. Yet something in him had shifted. The night's words still echoed, not loud but deep. He stepped outside and breathed in the cold. feeling it fill his lungs clean and sharp. The bunkhouse stood solid behind him, proof of work done over time, and for the first time in many years he did not feel chased by the horizon, only aware of it. As the sun lifted, he watched Thomas already at work, moving among the horses with easy confidence, a man whose life answered itself each morning. Breakfast was shared without ceremony, coffee poured, bread broken, the children bright with Christmas excitement now that the weight of the night had passed. Clara met Caleb's eyes only briefly, but with warmth and gratitude. No confusion left there, only understanding. Thomas spoke of weather and fences and cattle as if to anchor the day in ordinary truth, and Caleb joined in where he could, his voice steady. He felt like a guest who knew when his visit was ending. After the meal, Clara brought him the strongbox her father had left behind, saying it belonged with him for the journey, that he had earned the right to decide its resting place. Caleb accepted it carefully, aware of the trust in that gesture. He promised to see the old man buried proper, with a marker bearing his true name, and Clara nodded, tears shining but not falling when it came time to leave. There was no drama, only the quiet weight of farewell. The children hugged him as if he were a story come briefly to life. Thomas shook his hand firm and sure, thanking him for his honesty and his courage, words that meant more than praise. Clara stood a moment longer, speaking softly so only Caleb could hear. She said she was glad he lived the life he chose, even the hard parts, because it made this moment honest, because there were no lies left between them. Caleb answered that he was glad she stayed, glad she built something that could weather storms. They did not speak of love lost or dreams broken. They did not need to. The truth of it stood clear as the winter sky. Caleb mounted his horse and turned once more toward the ranch house, smoke rising steady from the chimney, laughter already beginning again inside, Christmas continuing as it should. He tipped his hat and rode out slow, not fleeing, not lingering. The road ahead stretched white and open, but it no longer felt empty. The strongbox rested secure behind his saddle, heavier than gold, carrying a man's last wish and a daughter's peace. As the ranch faded behind him, Caleb felt sorrow ease into something quieter, something like purpose. He was still a drifter, still bound to the trail, but now his steps carried meaning beyond survival. The journey south took days, snow giving way to hard ground and dust, nights spent under stars that felt less lonely than before. Caleb thought often of the ranch, of Thomas's steady hands and Clara's calm strength, and he measured his own life against theirs without bitterness, only clarity. He realized that freedom and belonging were not enemies, only different paths. His led him onward, theirs had led them home. Both required courage, both demanded sacrifice. When he finally reached the place where Clara's father lay buried under a false name, Caleb worked alone in the cold, setting a new marker, speaking the old man's true name aloud so the land would know it. The wind carried the sound away, but Caleb felt certain it was heard. He left the strongbox with the grave, letters and keepsakes sealed safe beneath the earth. A circle closed at last. Standing there, Caleb felt lighter than he had in years, as if a weight he did not know he carried had finally been set down. He spoke a quiet farewell, not just to the dead, but to the man he once was, the one who ran without looking back. The road called again, but now it sounded different, less like escape and more like invitation. Seasons would turn after that Christmas, and stories would be told of a drifter who passed through, carrying hard news and leaving peace behind. Thomas and Clara would speak of him kindly, not often, but honestly. The children would remember him as the man from the snow who told good stories and smiled with sad eyes. And somewhere on the wide plains Caleb would ride on, not searching for what was lost, but open to what might yet be found. The West held room for many kinds of lives, and his was one of them. On a distant Christmas years later, Caleb would pause beneath another winter sky, warming his hands by a small fire, and he would think of a ranch house glowing against the snow, of a knock that changed more than it took. And he would understand at last that love does not always mean staying. Sometimes it means arriving long enough to tell the truth, then riding on with grace, leaving behind not ruin but wholeness. And that, in its own way, was a gift worthy of Christmas.